Okay, everybody, we have a big shot guest with us, Chris Hedges, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, activist, best-selling author of 12 books, including his latest, The Greatest Evil is War. He previously hosted an Emmy-nominated show on Contact for RT America and RT International. His work can now be found on his Substack at chrishedges.substack.com. And I thought I saw you hosting a show on Real News, too, right? Please welcome Chris Hedges.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy.
Okay, so good for you. It's good to hear you, to have you back on YouTube. Sorry your whole library is gone. I just want to remind people, there's a story that's near and dear to both of our hearts. Julian Assange, he lost his last attempt to appeal to fight the extradition to the United States. And now let me bring it. No, I heard someone say, well, wouldn't it be better if he got extradited to the United States, because then everybody would see what a sham this is? But then someone said, no, they'll put it in a military tribunal, so you won't be able to see the trial. Let me throw it to you, Chris. What do you say?
Right. Well, it was a sham in London. And what they do is they limit, just like with Chelsea Manning. There were only 27 seats in Chelsea Manning's trial. Was in London with Julian's hearings and trials. Again, you had to line up at like 3 a.m. Activists would line up and then give those of us who covered it a seat. But you can't get in. It's just, having followed it from the beginning, it's just legal farce. I mean, the whole idea that you can extradite an Australian citizen under the Espionage Act, that the CIA can record all of the digital and videotape all the encounters with his attorneys, eviscerating attorney-client privilege, and the trial goes forward. It's in big and small ways. It's pretty grim if he comes here, because he'll get convicted in the Eastern District Court of Virginia. That's where they lynch. That's where all the quote unquote terrorists go, and that's where they all get lynched. Kronberg and all these nutcases who work out of it, and then it sets a legal precedent where anybody who, as a journalist, obtains classified information or documents, and I did when I worked for the New York Times and I published them, just to possess them is criminalized, much less to publish them. It's a really terrifying move. And his 2 appeals were turned down. He can file a kind of final brief emergency appeal, which his lawyers did yesterday. There's 6 weeks they have to respond. I think all of us expect that they will reject it. And what they do is there's no advance notice. So like with the Supreme Court ruling in Julian, it just appeared. And what we fear is that because there is that last possibility of the European International Court of Justice, what they'll do is the British security will be tipped off in advance. It will appear, and it's too late. He's already on the tarmac. I think that's what we expect, and that could happen within days or weeks.
And so it just, I just can't. It's crazy to me. And to most people, it should be, that we have a political party, the Democratic Party, and the head of it is Joe Biden, calling his political opponents fascists, as he's prosecuting one of the most award-winning journalists of our time, or of all time, for revealing war crimes, not for doing anything criminal, but for doing journalism. And everybody knows that's what's happening. I mean, everybody who's in media and they know what's going on. And so we're truly a banana republic. Like, what could possibly, I mean, I just can't believe this is going to happen, right? I can't believe it's gone on so long. And don't you, at some point, do you think the corporate media people, I mean, they have stood up actually and said things. It's like the New York Times even has admitted that this shouldn't happen. And I've seen, the hackiest of hacks on corporate news admit that Julian Assange is a journalist. So how could this really keep going?
Well, there isn't enough outrage. I mean, we really need to pull people into the streets. And it is true, very belatedly, that the Washington Post and El País, the Guardian, published a letter saying that Julian should not be extradited. But this is all driven by the CIA, because remember, it was Trump who called for the extradition, and he called for the extradition after Vault 7, which exposed the hacking tools the CIA use in our phones and even our cars and our television. It doesn't matter if you turn it off; they're still recording. And then you had Pompeo at the time as the head of the CIA. That's when they discussed kidnapping him or assassinating him, which is, of course, the primary business of the CIA, has been since it was founded. So this is driven by the intelligence agencies, which are a state within a state. It was started by Trump, is continued under Biden. Remember the deep animus on the part of the Democratic Party towards Assange for the Podesta emails. All the lies that Clinton was telling on the campaign, and then privately assuring all the titans of Wall Street that they would run the show, or paying her $375,000 a talk or 3 talk, can't remember. I mean, the sum so large it can only be considered a bribe. And then what was fascinating for me, or kind of appalling among the press, is that they were attacking Assange for releasing this information. And I thought, well, okay, I guess you could attack Assange for releasing that information, but you can't then call yourself a journalist. So he has no friends left. Journalists shouldn't have any friends anywhere anyway. But I'm stunned at how short-sighted it is on the part of the press. Well, they think they're going to stop with Julian. I mean, just out of self-interest, you think they would be, raising a cry about this, but they're not.
So what do you think? What will it take for this to stop? I mean, if he looks like it looks like he's going to be extradited to the United States. He's not even a citizen.
I know. Charged under the Espionage Act. It doesn't even make any legal sense. And WikiLeaks is not a U.S.-based publication, and that also sets a precedent. It means under the Espionage Act, we can go anywhere we want in the world and seize anybody who exposes, in terms of the eyes of the powerful, inconvenient truths. I mean, that's another precedent we're setting. Mm-hmm. Journalists anywhere, and of course, other countries will watch it and think, well, we'll do the same thing. It's really awful. And what it's going to take is people in the streets. But of course, they have mounted a systematic and very effective campaign of character assassination, starting with Sweden, with the charges which were untrue. And Niels Melzer, who speaks Swedish and is a lawyer, and the special rapporteur on torture for the UN, goes into that whole case in detail and how it was used to essentially isolate Julian. I mean, you discredit their reporting, then you isolate them, and then you get them. They're doing, by the way, it's the same playbook they're using against Matt Taibbi.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So it's anybody who, they just fired Tucker Carlson for, again, not for lying or hating on immigrants. They love it when he does that.
Yeah, of course.
He got fired for telling the truth about the Ukraine war and bringing RFK Jr. on to talk about the corruption of cable news by the big pharma. And you can't do that. It's the third rail. And he did it, and he was gone. To me, that's just the most amazing thing you see. Anybody who, as soon as they start to tell a little bit of truth, they're immediately ostracized, labeled a white supremacist, racist, fired. And they did the same thing they did the same thing to Bernie, right? So Bernie, they russiagated him. They said his followers were violent, misogynist, and racist. They did the same thing, except Bernie rolled over, tucked his tail, and went along with the establishment.
Yeah, well, that's what they do. I mean, it's kind of standard. I mean, you've been a victim of this. And it's effective because most people are passive consumers of information. The corporate airwaves control about 90% of what people ingest. They kind of get you to spit back the cliches you're fed. It is really effective. Let's look at Mehdi Hassan. I mean, this guy is just sort of beyond belief. It's posing as a journalist and then trying to get Matt Taibbi put in prison for, this is nuts. Or tracking down that poor 19-year-old kid, the National Guard, Air National Guard. Yeah. I mean, so we don't need the FBI. We have the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Bellencourt. Well, they doing the job for him. I mean, it's just, as somebody who's been in the business for a long time, I just am, my jaw drops. I just don't know. I don't know how to deal with it.
Well, the problem was that we thought Barack Obama was real and that he would use his youth following to do activism. He didn't. He immediately disbanded his following when he became president and started doing the bidding of the military-industrial complex in Wall Street and Big Pharma. And then the same thing happened with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, he had half the voting Democratic primary in 2016. He had half of those people, and he asked them to do exactly nothing for the next 4 or 5 years. Absolutely nothing after he lost in that primary.
Worse than that, he asked them to vote for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, he without getting anything. It's one thing to tell.
That's not true. That's not true. What he got was the Democratic Party didn't destroy him.
Yeah,
and they gave him a committee chairmanship. We did get something.
Isn't it great? Bernie's the chairman of the banking committee, Chris.
Well,
do you see the difference it's made?
Will he get a Netflix deal?
Maybe he'll get a Netflix deal now. So I don't. So if people get in the streets about Julian Assange, where would they go to get in the streets? Where would they?
Well, you'd go to where he's going to be held, which is in Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I was close friends with Michael Ratner, who we've lost a couple years ago. But Michael is one of the great lawyers, civil rights attorneys, founded Center for Constitutional Rights. He was Julian's lawyer, and I used to go with Michael to visit Julian in the embassy. But Michael was acutely aware that in order for him to do his job in the courts, he needed people in the streets. And there was a wonderful moment. I was in the courtroom in London, and Baritza, the judge, was upset because the chants from the crowd outside the courtroom were so loud you could hear it in the courtroom. That's the kind of stuff we got to do.
Okay. And there doesn't seem to be a national leader speaking out for Julian Assange. There doesn't seem to be, like a Tom Brokaw type. Not that Tom Brokaw would ever do that. I'm just saying someone with that kind of visibility, I don't even see the people you normally would look to on the left aren't really screaming about it. What kind of person do you think we need, or what did we need?
Well, we need, good media institutions that are going to cover this trial. If you look at the way the trials are covered in London, the Word trial, or even with Chelsea Manning's trial, the mainstream press did a horrific job. They covered the beginning and the end, but they didn't actually they weren't physically sitting through the trial and following. And the Post coverage was awful. So was the Times. So, one of the things that, I'm about to leave for London. One of the things is we're preparing for how to deal with the extradition. One of the most important is that we get good reporters in the courtroom, and they will severely restrict the number of people that can write daily about what's happening. We're at that level where just getting that information out is vitally important. I don't hold out a lot of hope for the big media organizations that they're going to cover this in any real way. And they haven't covered the trials in London well, and they didn't cover Chelsea's. It was all the alternative press that were doing the good work on those trials, both with Chelsea Manning and with Julian. Kevin Gostola, I may butcher his last name, but others, they did great work. So just from a journalistic standpoint, I've actually been working with Ben from Ben and Jerry's, who's great on Assange, and because we got to fund these people. They got to eat. They got to rent a place. They are working very hard to constrict and control the information because it is judicial farce. It's Dickensian. It's the old dark days of the Lubyanka. It's not the best of British or American jurisprudence. And if you follow, as I have, the details, it's just glaring. Just on the evisceration of attorney-client privilege alone, it should be thrown out. It would be thrown out in any normal trial.
And so how do they get, they handpick a judge who's pretty corrupt, just like they did with Dowsinger and...
Yeah, exactly. Same thing. Yeah.
Okay.
They're selected.
Yeah. So this is all a foregone conclusion. And so I just can't imagine them putting Julian Assange, a foreigner, in prison in the United States for espionage, for doing journalism, and United States people just letting it happen. But it looks like that might happen. So, well, more power to you. Please, good luck on your trip to London, and let everybody know what's happening. Anything else you want to say before we move on about Julian Assange?
No, for me as a journalist, it's if he's convicted, it's the end of any investigative journalism into the centers of power.
Yes,
it's really that serious.
Hey, come see us live on tour. Be in Bakersfield, Baltimore, San Francisco, Huntington Beach, Rosemont, and Chicago, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, New York City, Pottstown, Pennsylvania, Stamford, Connecticut, and more. Hey, go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.